I'm Marc Luxemburg. I'm a partner at Gallet Dreyer Berkey. I'm the president of the Council of New York Cooperatives and Condominiums, and I'm here today to talk about the section of the proprietary lease dealing with alterations of an apartment. Alterations are a very productive area for conflict and litigation. And it's very easy for shareholders to do things that the board doesn't like or that disturb the neighbors and create conflicts. So there is a section of the proprietary lease that deals with alteration. In the typical 1970s form of proprietary lease, it's called Section 21A. And it says three things, or three important things, that frequently lead to conflict. The first is that it says that the lessee, the shareholder, shall not, without first obtaining the written consent of the lessor, that is the cooperative, which consent shall not be unreasonably withheld or delayed. That's the first problem section. Make in the apartment or the building, or in any part of the building that's pertinent to the apartment, any alteration. Now, right there you have two clauses that are very productive of problems. The first is that consent shall not be unreasonably withheld. And that means that if the board objects to somebody's attempt to turn their apartment into the Taj Mahal, they have to give reasons for objecting. So what does the board do to fulfill that? Usually what the board does is hire an engineer or an architect to review the tenant's plans for the alteration. And based on the architect's comments, they will object to various portions of the work. But often the board goes beyond that, and the board has policies concerning what they do or do not want to have happen in the building. Policies based on the particular preferences of the board members, actually. So you will have a policy that says you can't put an air conditioner out on a terrace, with some engineering backup, but not necessarily a lot. And it has, that particular situation has been very productive of conflict, because the shareholder says, well, why don't you let me put an air conditioner out on the terrace? And those have gone to court. And frequently the court sides with the shareholder and says, the board's decision that it just doesn't want to allow an air conditioning unit out on the terrace is not a very good reason. And so the court substitutes its own judgment as to what should happen in the building for that of the board of directors. And that's not what people really bought into when they bought into a co-op. The first thing that I tell people about that is, if you have this clause, which consent shall not be unreasonably withheld or delayed, you call a meeting of the shareholders and amend it by getting rid of that clause. I should say that not every proprietary lease has that clause, but a significant number do. And if that clause is in there, it really behooves the board to remove it, because the board does lose control over the alterations. The second clause is that make in the apartment or the building, or on any roof, et cetera, pertinent to the apartment. And you would think that it would be sort of obvious that a shareholder wouldn't have a right to make an alteration in a part of the building that wasn't part of their apartment, regardless of giving reasons or not. But the appellate division, First Department, in its infinite wisdom, decided that the clause, which consent shall not be unreasonably withheld, applied to that section of the clause that said, or the building. And therefore, if the shareholder wanted to make an alteration somewhere else in the building that was outside of their apartment, the board had to give a good reason why they shouldn't be allowed to do that, which strains common sense to the utmost, but that's our court system, Common sense has not had any particular weight in court decisions recently. So there's a second section of the proprietary. I mean, there was a case about a year ago, a little more, where a shareholder wanted to make an alteration to a loading dock that was outside of the apartment. The court said, you have to give a good reason to stop the shareholder from making an alteration to the loading dock. It's because that's what it says. It's part of the building. And so certainly that's the second portion of that clause that should be amended. The proprietary lease really needs to be supplemented with respect to alterations by an alteration agreement, which is common enough because the proprietary lease is very broad brush and deals with, situations generally, but the boards generally supplement that with an alteration agreement, which is very specific about what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do, the conditions under which you can do it, the insurance that the shareholder requires, and all those myriad of details that the proprietary lease doesn't get into. So that's a third way the proprietary lease needs to be supplemented with an alteration agreement. And of course, the problem with that is that the alteration agreement requires the shareholder to provide plans, and very frequently the shareholder does things that aren't in the plans. And when the board finds out about it, there's always conflict, for sure. And the argument is typically, well, you approved this, and the answer is no, I didn't. And well, here it is. Well, I didn't approve that. I approved these plans, and then you came up with those plans. So the board, in addition to what's actually written, the board has to supplement what's in writing by paying very close attention to what's actually going on in the apartment. Unfortunately, most boards, the alteration agreement gets signed, the shareholder starts doing the work, and nobody pays attention, and all of a sudden there's a flood, as there always is. Or it goes on for months, and the neighboring shareholders complain about banging. And so the other issue that's not in the proprietary lease, but the board needs to pay attention to is following up and keeping close tabs on what's actually going on in the apartment.